We believe that God has preserved in the earth and under the seas remains of the major events discussed in the Bible. Physical remains, chemical remains, and things that you and I can see, feel, test, and in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah and its sulfur, even taste. These things have been preserved by divine power to a point in time when, by satellite, TV, relay systems, and the ability to translate everything of interest into most everyone's language, these things can be shown to the inhabitants of the earth. Now then, we are told in the last book of the Bible, in the last chapter of that book, that there will be those that love and make lies. The world is full of those people today, so you and I must be very careful what we accept as truth. We need to look at these things that you're about to see very carefully and prayerfully, and then we may need to make a decision about our relationship with God. When Paul talked to Felix, it says, and Felix trembled. And then when he talked to another one of the Roman rulers, he says, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. So what we need to do today is to ignore all of those who are inspired by Satan to make you and I believe that there is no reason for us to be in a hurry to make our relationship with God sure. We need to ignore these because life is uncertain. You and I have no guarantee that we'll be alive tomorrow. But friend, if we only serve God to avoid the punishment of the wicked or to have an eternal life, then we have missed the whole point, because God loves us. He has demonstrated that in so many ways. And we need to arrive at a point in our relationship with Him that we can say, as Paul said, the love of God constraineth me.
This is the dedication ceremony of Noah's Ark. It happened in 1987. It's just showing the dedication. Okay, for the viewers who are not aware, this is the actual remains of Noah's Ark. And I know it doesn't look like much, but you will soon find that this is one of the most incredible things you have ever seen, but we'll get to that later. This is the Ark after Ron had done some testing on it. Mm-hmm. And you can see the Turkish government has built a visitor center. Mm-hmm. Now, what got Ron interested in looking for Noah's Ark? Mm-hmm. He read this in Life magazine in 1960. Wow. And it said, Noah's Ark, boat-shaped form seen near Ararat. Mm-hmm. And Ron read this article with great interest. When he saw this photo in the article right here, it said that this was located during the Cold War in the mid-50s, when they were looking for missile bases in Turkey by Russia. If we look at this map here, right, you will see this location. See the arrow? Mm-hmm. You can see the Soviet Union is just over the border. Right. And Iran is just down to the south. Mm-hmm. And during the Cold War, they were looking for Soviet missile bases. And a captain in the Air Force in Turkey saw the stereo photos and said, this is of great interest. Huh. And a man in the United States by the name of Dr. Arthur Brandenberger, who was, I would say, the world's leading authority on photogrammetry, looked at that and said, that is a man-made object. Wow. Ron went to the Bible And it says, where did the ark land? The ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains, plural, of Ararat.
Mm.
And that right there told him something,
Mm.
because he knew the beautiful Mount Ararat you see here on the left is Mount Ararat the major, and then on the right is the minor Ararat.
Yeah.
And it is an active volcano.
Oh,
If
wow.
you will look at this photo right here,
Mhm.
in the lower left-hand corner, you can see all the lava that's flowed out. It's on the right side, it's on the left side. This mountain had its latest eruption, I believe, in the 1840s sometime. And as you can see from this photo right here,
Mhm.
on the other side, it blew out a massive part of the mountain.
Wow.
It, if you look at Mount St. Helens
Mhm.
and then
yeah.
look at that,
Okay.
and he was concerned that nothing could have ever survived on that mountain.
Sure.
So when he saw this September 5th, 1960 Life magazine article, he believed that something needed to be investigated, and the team that went there said there was nothing there of any archaeological interest.
Mm.
They didn't know what they were looking for.
Okay.
The
So-
first thing that Ron did was an experiment, because he wanted to know what kind of a configuration of mountains that a ship would come to rest in. And he did an experiment, and it was, this was 2 years before he ever went there.
Now, the story of the flood indicates that the ark was a free floating object on an earth covered with water, and that it came to rest in some mountains. So with this in mind, I built a small model of the boat, 6-to-1 ratio, as is mentioned about the ark. And then I constructed miniature mountains in a shallow flowing stream, and I would release the model boat upstream from these little mountains, and by changing the shape and size of these mountains, I was able to determine what configuration of mountain the boat would most likely come to rest in. And so I found that a crescent-shaped mountain oriented to the northeast or southeast would be the most likely place that a free-floating object would come to land.
Interesting.
It was interesting because he knew, like most people are looking for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, which is a recent volcanic mountain. It wasn't even there then.
Right.
And he knew that a peak sticking out of the water like this, a ship would not come to rest on it.
Okay.
So once Ron had done that, he decided that he, even though it was now 15 years after he had read that article,
Mhm.
and his kids, as you can see his family here,
Mhm.
he was a single dad and he raised his children by himself, and he was afraid that they were not old enough for him to leave alone.
Mm.
But by 1977, he made a decision.
Mhm.
And that decision was that it was time to go. So Ron decided that his children were probably old enough to go, so he went and talked to all the members of the expedition.
I called all of the members of the 1960 Vanderman expedition group that I could contact by telephone, and I asked these individuals how they had gotten to the boat, and found that the Turkish military had actually led them to the site. And what they stated was that they had gotten on horseback and rode 6 hours to where the boat was located. Some stated that they had mounted the horses in Dobazit. Some stated that that had taken place at the Iranian border. So wherever they left from, a 6-hour ride on horseback could take a person anywhere out there. So I didn't have a real firm idea.
No.
Now, he didn't know where to go. And if you ever go out there in Turkey, that whole area, there's so many mountains.
Yeah.
He had no idea where to go, none whatsoever, because this was high up in a mountain. It is 6,300 feet up in the mountains,
Wow.
but nobody knew what it was.
Right.
I need to make the point here. There have been stories told by some people who've made up stories, but we've checked them out, that
Right.
people knew about this, and that it popped out of the ground at a certain time, and that's not true. The people who lived around it, they didn't know anything about it. It was just more dirt to them.
Okay.
Now, Ron was finally ready in 1977, and he's going to talk a little bit about it, and then in a minute we'll hear his sons talk.
In 1977, I had saved up about $2,000, and I noticed an ad in the newspaper about a charter flight going to Turkey. And while I wasn't interested in the places that the tour group were going to be taken, I was interested in the fare, which was around $500. And so I planned to go, got reservations, and then my two sons, Danny and Ronnie, began to pressure me to come along with me.
When we first went, he didn't want us to go. He was going to go by himself. You know, he already had a passport, and my brother said, "Why don't you take us, Ronnie?" And Dad said, "Well, I'm leaving in a week. There's no way we can get a passport or anything." And Ronnie said, "Well, let's go try." So we went and applied.
We didn't have much time, so the day before we were going to leave, we packed all our bags, all our stuff, got it ready just in case, because we knew that if we were going to get them, it would probably be that day, or we weren't going to get them at all. And so we were ready to go. And then come about 11 o'clock that day, the mail came, and there were our passports. And so we had about an hour and a half to get to the airport after they got there, but we were all ready, so we just went, you know. So it was kind of a miracle in itself that me and my brother even got to go on.
That was definitely a miracle right there. For some reason, those boys were meant to go. And so when it came down to the actual trip, I think it was not exactly what they were expecting, but I'm going to let them all talk about it.
Well, we took a train partway down there, and we thought the train was going to be real nice. Oriental Express. We had heard all kinds of good stuff about that. We got on the train, and it was okay. There was 6 bunks, and they were all on the wall. So we got in there, and you know, it was okay. Then it was an experience, but the train was rough. It wasn't nice as what my dad thought it was going to be. We thought we were going to be on a nice plush train. We went in the bathroom. There was no toilet seats or anything. It's just a hole in the floor, so we didn't. That was a surprise to us. We'd never seen that.
And the train went so slow that most of the times you could have walked along beside it. It was just terrible. He was saying, "Guys, we might just have come over here for nothing, because I don't have any idea which way how we're gonna find this." And we finally got a cab after that, and he drove us on down into the town, Dogobazit. And on our way in, our dad told me and my brother, he said, "You know, the Bible says it, when 3 or more are gathered, you know, and pray in my name, that he'll answer it." And so he said, "We really need to say a prayer that God will help us know which way to look." And so we did, and we were getting close to Dogobazit, the town close to Ararat, and the car stopped, and it was in the middle of the night, and everything just went dead, lights out, everything, and just stopped. So we had to stop real fast in the road, and we had just got done saying that prayer, just not 5-10 minutes before that. And so my father said, why don't we pile a big pile of rocks up here on the side of the road just in case this is something God did to show us how to find it? And so, well, okay. And we piled a big pile of rocks up, and we get back in the car, and just the guy shuts the hood because he doesn't see anything, just tries it again, it starts up. And so we drive on down the road some more little ways, and then the car dies again. And so we're thinking, well, this may be just car trouble we're having, but we're going to pile up some more rocks anyway on the side of the road.
And we did, and then it stopped 2 more times, and after the 3rd time we were saying, Dad, the car is just messing up. But he had to stack rocks up again. He said, well, let's do it again just in case. And I was saying, the car is messing up, this is a waste of time. But it turned out it wasn't. I was wrong, Dad was right.
Well, we went to the hotel, and the next morning we decided, well, our best shot is to go out and take off from where those rocks are. So we went back out and headed across at a 90-degree angle. I picked out a hill way off in the distance, and we headed right for that. Anyway, our canteen leaked. We had to drink all the water that was in it. Rather than waste it, we got so dry that we drank some water out of a little ditch there and walked a little ways farther, and here was sheep and goats and cows and horses waiting around upstream from where we had drank, and it was just a real thrill there. But anyway, as I was walking along, we came to this Kurdish village, and we thought having horses to ride would be much better than walking. So we negotiated a deal, and everything was set. We were just about to give them some money and get the horses, and somebody in the crowd said Muhammad. Well, these faces that were smiling and all of that turned to just real anger. And I didn't know exactly what had happened for a bit, but then I remembered that it was Friday, and that's their holy day. So there went our horses. But one of the young men said, pointed at himself and said, guide. And of course, I didn't want to guide because I knew right where I was going. So he kept trying to get us to go this way and trying to get us to go that way and drawing crosses on his hands and all this, but we just kept going. And he kept wanting us to take his picture, photo. And so anyway, finally we were up on the hill, and he had bugged me to death, and I was out of breath, so I needed to stop for a minute, and I said, okay, photo. So he walks over by this big rock and stands by it, and I get my camera up, focus this thing in, and there was this anchor stone that I showed you on top of that ridge. It's now busted up. When I saw that thing, I mean, folks, that was a thrill. The second day we went back to, followed a 90-degree angle from, or a perpendicular line from the highway at the second stopping point, or the middle one, and arrived at the giant anchor stone. And directly beyond that was an ancient house and what was obviously a very ancient accommodations for breeding cattle and for slaughtering cattle. And we concluded that this was Noah's house. And the reason we did that, of course, was that there were 2 stones inscribed with petroglyphs indicating that 8 people that had come from a boat that had been involved in a flood and with some animals, and later we found that this whole thing was covered by a rainbow, that we didn't conclude that originally when we saw this span above the heads of these individuals, but this told us that this had something to do with the legend of Noah's Ark and the flood. Pile number 3, Noah's Ark. But this time my sons had acquired some upset stomachs and other problems, so we went out in our taxi and I walked up over the top of a ridge which later we found to be in Iran, and actually saw the boat-shaped formation through the telephoto lens of my camera. However, I did not go directly on the site, and the reason for that was that I had become convinced that our taxi driver and our guide were dangerous to us. At the end of that day, when we went back to the hotel, the taxi driver and the guide showed up with some friends of theirs. And these friends, while some of them tried to distract us, were trying to get in our camera cases and our luggage and this sort of thing. So it became obvious that they were intent on robbing us. I had carried along some mace just in case some situation developed like this, so I chased all of these people out of the room, barricaded the door. They came back with help, and were in the process of breaking the door down. So we quickly tied some sheets and blankets together, went out the window down to a lower floor, crawled back through a window there into the hotel, and basically fled off into the night in, shall we say, very frightened frame of mind. The net result of this was that we lost most all of our film from that trip. We were able to keep some 8mm movie film, which documented the grave markers and some of these things.
After that trip, he wouldn't just tell people this is Noah's Ark, but he absolutely believed it because God was clearly working on that trip.
Right.
And all of the footage that you've seen on there was that original footage that he was able to save.
Wow.
So when he got home from that trip, he got a man from Michigan. He contacted him, who was a doctor and an archaeologist, and said, can you help me? Can you apply for an excavation permit? And he showed him the evidence, explained things, and the man wrote him up. I have a copy of the application, but it was denied, which we now know that would always be denied by a foreigner. But Ron got to thinking about it, and he decided that the ark itself, the site, is almost 2 football fields long. It's huge.
Yeah.
And what was he going to do?
Right.
So I'm going to let him explain
Right.
what he did after that.
Okay.
When I first found this in 1978 or 77, we applied for a permit to excavate it, and this was denied. So I asked some friends, and I myself prayed that God would send an earthquake out there and show what this was. And so on December 28, 1978, there was an earthquake out there. And I'd just gotten home from work, and here, you know, the news was on telling about this big earthquake. Well, I just got goosebumps from head to toe, and I said, thank you, Lord. Now, what we did do, after we had prayed this prayer for an earthquake, I realized that this is not a very nice thing to do to people that lived in the area, is to pray that an earthquake hit out there. Well, we modified our prayer and asked the Lord, you know, to not let anyone be killed in the earthquake. And as it turned out, there was nobody killed. Only one house was destroyed in a village. It slid down an embankment there. But anyway, we were able to, not only did it drop things away from the sides of the boat, but it split the boat right down the middle. Now, in archaeological examination and evaluation of remains, the depth of the remains is very important, we were able to see how deep the remains were at this point, and that they changed and became deeper at these here, and then deeper yet here. And so this is how we knew where the decks began and ended in the longitudinal aspect. In other words, from front to back.
Now, a very important thing that we haven't touched on yet is the thing that really captured his interest in the 1960 article was the length of the object.
Right.
They said it was at least 500 feet long. They didn't really measure it. So when Ron measured it, he found out it was much longer than people have been looking for a 437.5-foot Noah's Ark, because that's the Hebrew cubit.
Right.
But one of the most important things to Ron at the very beginning of his interest in this site was the length. In Genesis 6:15, it says that the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. And so what most people are looking at today is different. What cubit do we use? In Acts 7:22, it says Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deed. And the Egyptian cubit of Moses' time is generally recognized as having been the most ubiquitous or universal standard of linear measurement in the very ancient world. And the Royal Egyptian cubit is 20.62 inches. Now, if we take a look at the Hebrew cubit, and of course the Hebrews didn't come along until much later. The Hebrew nation was after Moses' death, and it became 18 inches. The Royal Egyptian cubit was 20.6 inches. So where some people are looking for a 450-foot ark, 300 Royal Egyptian cubits is 515 feet.
Wow.
And that is exactly what it measured out to be.
Wow.
In later years, Ron had scientists come out there and they used very sophisticated laser measurements to measure it. And that's
That was
the length.
That is amazing. Yeah.
That was the first photo that Ron took. And you can't really see the sides real well.
Right.
But looking at it from one end, the lower end, there you can see how the dirt is piled up against it. It's all pretty much ground level.
Right.
Well, after the earthquake, it was just like it popped up out of the ground.
Wow.
But it didn't pop up out of the ground. What happened was the soil just all fell away.
Wow.
And as Ron went around the site and looked at it, he saw what he believed were rib timbers all around. As he walked around the ark and looked at it, he saw these unique features to it sticking out. And here's another one you can see, but it looks like dirt and rocks, right?
Right.
That's what everybody else would think.
Yeah.
And I firmly believe that God gave Ron the ability to look at these things and to understand them.
Yes.
You'll notice on the left-hand side, do you see all of those dark marks there?
Uh-huh.
Well, as you look all up and down the edge of the ark, going up the front, are these rocks, because they are rocks now. They are what you would call fossilized
Okay.
or petrified.
Petrified, yeah.
But Ron believed that what you were seeing were where the ship had collapsed, that these posts were sticking up all along the side of the ark.
Wow.
And so he was absolutely convinced, but he thought, how am I going to convince others?
Right.
When he was standing inside of the ark, here's some other interesting things that he saw right at first. If you'll notice, above Ron's head and above his head to the left are these protrusions sticking out.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Here is another picture of those protrusions,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a number of these along the ark.
Right.
And here is a picture of this. This picture was made with a 3D camera, so it's not very good, but it gives you an idea of the size.
Yeah.
And what Ron believed these were deck joists,
Ah,
because on the edge, if you'll look at the lower picture,
right.
you can see how they connect on the other side. On the knobby part on the inside connects to the ribs on the outside.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, he
And
had
so,
insight.
yes,
Yeah.
that is something that I saw all during my marriage to him, was that there's no doubt in my mind that God gave him information or understanding that other people just didn't have.
Right.
And it took a lot for me to be able to sit here and talk to other people or go out and talk to anyone else and say, this is Noah's Ark. I had to be sure myself.
Right.
And of course, I've been there many, many times.
Mhm.
I couldn't even tell you how many times.
Wow.
And what Ron believed happened was he believed that something happened to the ship that preserved it and caused it to be fossilized.
Wow.
Now, we know that scientists and teachers in colleges and all of that will tell you it takes millions of years for something to fossilize,
Mm.
but that's not true,
Right.
because the Earth is just now barely 6,000 years old.
Right.
And I don't, I don't apologize for believing the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
but what he believed was going on was something had preserved it and caused it to fossilize. And in our next edition of this program, we'll get into that,
Okay.
and you'll see why and the evidence. But right now, I want to talk about when Ron looked at the ark and saw this, see down here, this part that's sticking out on the right-hand side.
Mhm.
If you'll notice, right above it, there is a rock that's sticking right into almost the middle of the
Okay.
ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ron understood this to mean that the ark traveled into that rock and was impaled and then slid around
Right.
in place.
Wow.
And when he did his, remember when we showed him doing those little mountains
Right.
and it showed a scooped out area in the mountain.
Right.
As he looked right up the mountain, he found it.
Wow.
And here he is. He's showing right there. And here is an actually better picture.
Wow.
It was exactly what
Like
he saw would pull the ark into it and hold it, a crescent shape of mountains.
that is incredible. Just the fact that
Now-
he practiced that in order to know that when he got there. That's incredible.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. And only God could tell him to do that. He believed that what happened was from that crescent shape up there, the ark came down the mountain, was impaled on this rock outcropping, and swung around in line with a lava flow.
Wow.
Now, is there any evidence to support such an idea?
Now, what is very interesting out there is up on the ridge just above where Noah's Ark rests was once a large stele that in two petroglyphic writing styles and in a cuneiform writing style state that is the place that Noah's Ark landed.
Ron, explain to folks what a stele is.
Okay, a stele is basically a large, flat, wide stone, a tablet, if you please, of stone. And on this, they, in size, these written material, inscriptions. Now, what often happened in ancient times is that people who came later, airheads, if you don't mind my saying so, that had no regard for the historical value of these inscriptions, they would break them up and use them for other purposes to, to build something else. In Egypt, Horeb took almost all of the materials about Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king, and used them in his buildings. And someone took this stele, broke it up, and made a border marker between Turkey and Iran. And so that was rather frustrating, but we were able to see enough to reproduce part of what is written on those stones. We would like to replace these stones with cement blocks that would serve the purpose of, of a border marker, and bring these stones into a safe keeping and work them together as one would a jigsaw puzzle.
This is was taken during my very first trip to Noah's Ark back in the 80s when big hair, you know.
I do remember.
But it was windy that day too. I promise it didn't look that way all the time.
Yeah.
But I was able to understand this picture better. Ron made this drawing that's on top here
Mhm.
when he had a chance to spend time looking at the border marker and get the pieces together.
Okay.
And what this shows, if you'll notice at the top, there's cliffs above the mountain
Right.
that stick out, kind of pointed on
Right.
the left-hand side. And down below, you can see that kind of a third of the way over, and it's kind of white looking.
Right. Mhm.
And as you go over past that first bird, you'll see there was what looks like a volcano.
Yeah. It's not
And
there.
that would have been on the right-hand side of this photo. And we discovered that, yes, there was a volcano on the other side, but it was spent.
Wow.
So this was made, this stele was made back many, many thousands of years ago. And it shows the existence of a volcano over there. Today, that volcano is no longer there, and there is a trail of like a mud flow from up top all the way down to where the ark is, and it continues down. And what happens to lava that decays
Mhm.
is it degrades back into dirt and forms a mud flow.
Wow.
And so this proved that at some point in time, and the shape of the ark, if you'll look over at the picture, the shape of the ark, you can see that it's pointed on both ends, where it's not actually pointed on both ends in the remains because some of it is damaged.
Okay.
But
That's incredible.
the top of this ridge where we were, remember when Ron said earlier, it was when he came around to see the ark, he was actually into Iran.
Mhm.
Well, this, where we're standing, right as I took this picture, is very close to the Iranian border. And the road that goes all along that way is the old Silk Road
Wow.
that Marco Polo traveled and wrote about.
Right.
And what Ron believed was that this was a marker marking the location of where Noah's Ark was, because that crescent shape in the mountains that we looked at earlier
Mhm.
is just beyond this, very close. So this was like an ancient billboard.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so the evidence all around, there is something else
Yeah.
that I need to, I think I forgot to mention earlier. And that is that the little village that Ron went into,
Mhm.
nobody that was living there knew anything about any of those remains that were there.
Wow.
It's an old cemetery. It has these humongous stones that Ron said some of them were definitely drogue stones or anchor stones. And what happened is during World War I in 1917, there was a massacre and those people were wiped out. And then new people moved in, and they are Kurdish people who live there now. And they know that the region is called the Region of the Eight, and this little town is called the Town of the Eight, but they don't know why.
Huh.
And all of the anchor stones and everything have crosses drawn on them. So
Yeah.
this was after the Christian era.
Right.
Some of the styles were crusaders. Different styles came through here and put those on there. And the 8 of them represent Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 daughters.
Wow. The 8.
And so that's where they lived. Now,
Wow.
remember earlier when we showed you it was the very second day that Ron was there,
Right.
and he saw an old house and he saw these tombstones.
Yeah.
He's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So anyway, we, shall we say, shared the information of this discovery with somebody that, was just such a wonderful Christian that, and I've since learned that all these people that come and tell you how wonderful Christian they are aren't wonderful Christians. If they really are, they won't be trying to convince people of it. But at that time I was naive, so I told him where these things were. After I left the area, he paid a villager there $400 American to dig up Noah's wife's grave. Well, there's a law that says you can't dig up graves in Turkey. And so to get around that, they broke up these headstones. Now I have photographs of these that I took back in 1977. But I was under the impression that they were going to be there and I could do a better job of photographing them, clean some of the age material off so you get a good clear picture of it. I didn't do that, and I wish now I had. But these people busted all of these, scattered them around so that if they were caught digging, that they could say they were digging for water.
The pictures that you did take, do they show the
Very
petroglyphs?
vaguely. It's not as clear as I would like it to be. As a matter of fact, I'd like to have done a rub on these. You can make a latex plaster thing and get a perfect cast of what's on there. And I would like to have done that, but again, I did not anticipate these good Christians doing that sort of thing, to destroy the evidence for money. That was very, shall we say, I learned a very painful lesson there. But anyway, they dug up Noah's wife, and she was a giant individual. Her sarcophagus is 18 feet in length, and it's stored in the Anatolia Museum in Ankara. It's not on public display, but there are some giant sarcophagus that can be seen, back from that period of time. Well, they took from her skeleton enough gold and jewels that they were able to sell them for over $100 million, US dollars, on the black market in Istanbul. Now, all that's left of her skeleton, to the best of my knowledge, are a few hands, bones, fingers, bones, phalanges. As usual, the lowest paid individual takes the fall. Well, they caught the villager that had supervised the excavation of this grave, and they questioned him. Now, I wasn't there when they questioned him, but I have been present when some people were being questioned. They take a wire and get it right around this bone here in the hand, and take a pair of pliers, and they turn this, tighten it up so it would actually, rip the whole thumb off if they kept going. And people get real talkative under those circumstances. So this fellow told them everything, and that he knew. Well, they traced the people that had paid this guy to do this. Turned out that a very high-ranking government official was in on it, and that's where the investigation stopped.
So it hasn't gone any further at that point?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Now, I felt real bad about all of this being lost. I mean, we could have learned a lot from the way the things were made and all of this. But Mary Nell, my wife, said probably the way people are, that if we had been able to put that in with our discovery of Noah's Ark, that everybody would have been more interested in the gold, the jewelry, and all of that than they would have been in Noah's Ark.
Very well could have.
Yep, and I suspect that since God allowed it to be taken, that he, realizes that that is a part of the human condition.
Good point. Very good point. But
Now,
what a-
I'd like to finish today by sharing one more thing with you.
okay.
One time when we were out there looking at where the grave had been dug up, Ron and I were busy looking for pieces of the tombstone. We found some,
Right.
but there was a lady with us, and this was so funny, and I'll never forget it. And I'm not going to mention her name because I don't want to humiliate her. She had a real Southern drawl. I know I don't, but she said, "Looks like somebody's been out here eating chicken."
Huh.
And Ron said, "What do you mean?" And she pointed to something, and we looked down, and he picked up what she thought were chicken bones, brought them home, had them investigated, and they are human finger bones.
Oh, wow.
And here they are. Let's see.
There you go.
They all fit together, and you can
Ah.
see how long that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And interestingly, she had a touch of arthritis.
Oh, wow. A little higher?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, a little higher. Can you see that?
A little bit higher.
Right there.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
And we've never really talked about these very much because a lot of people have some strange ideas. But Ron talked about, how things were much bigger
Yeah.
before the flood.
Right.
And we know that. All we have to do
Yeah.
is look at the fossil record
Yeah.
and all. But I apologize. I'm learning the program today,
Yeah,
how to
good.
do this.
Yeah.
And I hope that your viewers have been able to glean something from this.
Yes. That's wonderful.
The next one that we do will cover all of the evidence of the ark itself,
Yeah.
which is overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming.